Hey folks, so I'm going to be taking some of my Begonia pavonina seedlings and root them. But if you look at them, they do, even though they're young seedlings, you can still see them. Let's give it some mesopic levels of light. You can still see a little bit of iridescence in them, so it's kind of cool. Though it's a little too bright right now to display them, but I had this lid basically tight to begin, and then once they've rooted, I took it out and kept it sitting on top. Sometimes I'd let it sit exposed for a few minutes to help it breathe, and this way I was able to acclimate them a little bit more to drier conditions. So now I'm going to pot these up. Looking at these seedlings, I need to figure out how to pull them out so delicately. So this leaf is, see, they're all root bound, and I want to make sure I'm not going to crush any of the seeds. So I managed to flip it over. You can tell I watered it recently since I have some water drainage. But these leaves can actually be used for more plants too. Something I read online, you can see roots forming here. So I have to separate these carefully. And you can see this one, it's starting to grow a second leaf, which is nice actually, against the black, looks better there. So I'm going to make sure I don't damage these roots, and I'm just going to cut it like so, and I'm going to leave this like that. This one I'm going to put aside. Let's see, another one. Whoops. There are plenty of fruits forming on here where you have veins on the leaf, so I'm actually going to cut this out like that. And I can actually, with that cut, continue using that for more. So now I have two. This one is nice because look at how many plants I received off one. This one is still really too tiny to pot. I have two growing, so these I'll be putting them in another container along with that. Give them more time to produce. And look at that tiny one right there. Wow. Is that one? No, that's moss. Okay, but it's rooting. So then this bad boy here, you can see how even the sphagnum moss has started to turn green. No, that's grass or something that was debris in the moss, but this is going to be tricky trying to get that loose. You don't have to pry all the moss off the plant because it helps with the rooting. If it helps the roots stay healthy, so you don't have to pry it all, but I do need to access the plants to take them off the leaves. So hence I'm having to try to untangle them. But all these, if I recollect, were a single leaf from my pavonina. It was damaged, but in still good shape otherwise. And I have now 6 plants and a few little tiny plantlets from it. So I'm actually going to take this leaf. Because these leaves are still green and in good shape, you can get more plants out of it. I tried some yellowing leaves and they did not fare well at producing any new plants. I want to keep a little segment of leaf attached to it just so I can keep the plant healthy. And because these are typically propagated by rhizome division, if you don't do it by leaf cuttings, because you get a bigger plant sooner with rhizome divisions, it's not going to be an issue to separate these. But you see this one's a little lower on the leaf and that one's a little higher. So I'm actually going to have to be skillful in this and cut this at an angle. Yeah, there we go. And here we have it. So now that I cut these, I can go ahead and pot them up. I took a clear plastic container, filled it up with some pots, and put it with some soil that has a large mix of perlite so that the roots can breathe and establish readily. So you can see how the soil is a little dry, so I'll be just coaxing it and being careful not to damage the roots. And I'm keeping these fluffy. I'm not compacting it because I don't want to damage the roots, but also if I keep it airy, it will allow more of the roots to take hold a lot better. This is a very long root system on this specimen right here, or on this plant seedling. So there we go. So I have 15 pots, but only about 6 or so plants. So these will basically, I'll have to add to them as I go, or take some other plants to propagate in here to go along with it, but these are just near the surface because the rhizome typically grows on the surface for rhizotomous begonias. So essentially, I'm basically not planting them really, really deep. If I want them deeper, I could always add soil, but since these plants typically, the rhizome grows on the surface, I'm just keeping it fairly shallow, and as it grows, it will be off the top. So that's what I'm doing. That one's buried a little more, but it should be okay. And just as an experiment, I have one of the little tiny seedlings, and I'm going to just see, maybe it will be okay planting here. Now this soil is really dry and these plants like moisture, so I do have some water that I'm going to provide, and just so you can see, I'm pouring it from the side, and I'm just going to let the soil soak up the moisture and absorb into the pots. This way I'm not pouring from above and having it compact, so this way the roots can establish a lot more readily. So to begin, I'm going to put a lot of water, but I don't want too much, so I'm going to stop about there, and then the water level will drop as it soaks in the pots. And once the pots are saturated enough, it will be great. They don't need to be overly wet because I'm going to put the lid on here, and they're going to be in a nice humid environment, and I can actually take the lid off. I'm not going to use the latches on this container, so that there is a little airflow and breathability to it. So now I can put it in the right spot for it to grow and for it to get enough light, my nice little rack that I have built. Here's my grow rack, and you can see them in there. It's going to be fun watching them develop and grow and establish in these pots. Over here is another one I set up with some Cebu Blue Pothos Epipremium Pinnatum, and these will, with the humidity, it will help them establish sooner under really bright grow lights. So that's all there is to it. I've transplanted these seedlings, and hopefully they'll be nice, happy plants that people can enjoy. But you can see where the water level is, and it's going to slowly soak in there. And I'm going to make sure it's not going to, make sure it soaks so that the top will also be wet. I don't want to keep it dry too long, so I'm going to have to keep an eye on it as it soaks, but it does take a few minutes. As it starts absorbing water, it can help wick in more water, but when it's really dry, it's harder to wick in some water. But this soil wasn't completely parched, which is good. Well, I hope you enjoyed this video. I hope you're inspired to plant your own plants in such fashion. Thanks for watching and happy planting.